Hey Crusty Car fans, this is Dave from Chasing Crusty Cars. And this video is the first in my series where I'm actually out on the hunt looking for crusty cars. So actually literally chasing down crusty cars. And our inaugural vehicle in this inaugural video in the series is what I affectionately call the FrankenBeetle. Now, why do I call it the FrankenBeetle? Because it's a mashup of two different model years. It's a mashup of a 1967 Beetle and a 1968 Beetle. Now, when you mash up parts from different vehicles, you ultimately need to know what model year is it as far as the Department of Motor Vehicles is concerned. And that question is answered by the following test. Which VIN label does it have? Which VIN tag does it have? So I'm going to use our picture of Red here, which is a 1969 Beetle. And he's going to be kind of our model as I describe some of the which parts are 1967 and which parts are 1968. So on this Beetle, the main shell of the FrankenBeetle is in 1967. And that is evidenced by most, let's say authoritatively, by the VIN tag, which is pop riveted in the spare tire well, which is pretty much behind this little handle you use to lift up the trunk lid. Here's a photo that'll give you a better idea of where the VIN tag is located. This photo is from my 1969 Blue Bug, and this would be identical to what you'd see in a 1968 Beetle. When you open the trunk lid and remove the spare tire out of the spare tire well, which is what you're seeing here, the spare tire has been removed. What you see is the black panel, circular panel near the bottom of the photo with a couple of screws holding it. Immediately to the left of that is the VIN tag. It's that silvery colored aluminum looking label that has embossed letters and numbers on it. You might be kind of curious, what about that opening above where all the machinery and the grime and grit and crust is visible? I had removed the fuel tank to clean and then paint it. The fuel tank effectively serves as kind of like the floor for the trunk area, but I had removed it for the repair I was doing. So you're also getting a sneak peek at some of the steering related machinery and the part of the floor pan, the tunnel that runs the length of the pan. You also see a kind of a rusty looking master brake cylinder there. Okay, back to the video. Let's talk about why even I would care that's a 1967 versus a 1968, even though in some respects those model years might not be vastly different, but they're different enough. One of the driving reasons for what appeals to me about this vehicle is my first car was a 1967 Beetle. And if you're like me and a lot of other people, we have a soft spot in our heart for our first car, especially if we had some good experiences with it. And so I had a 67 Beetle and I just loved it. So some of the qualities that the 67 have and what make it kind of unique is it's the last model year of the VW Beetles that had the nostalgic, quaint features and qualities that started to get lost when we went to the 1968 and later model years. Now, don't get me wrong. This 1969 Beetle that I call Red, I love this car. It's a great car, and people give me thumbs up when I'm driving it, and they like to tell me stories about the car they had. Oh, I had one like that, and I just have a ball driving this car. I really love it. The 67 Beetle was the last year that they had things like the metal dash. It's probably the most conspicuous and probably one of the more sought after or desirable features of it. It's the last year of the metal dashboard. From 1968 and later, they put on this foam molded pad, which I'm pretty certain was a requirement by the Department of Transportation to make it safer. Whether you could make it measurably safer or not is doubtful, but it had that pad. And 67, not only did it have the metal dash, it was also the last year they had separated the fuel gauge from the speedometer gauge. In later years, they integrated it into one gauge. I'm sure that was given a cost saving in manufacturing. So, you know, that older dashboard has some other aesthetics about it besides just the foam pad not there. It's a metal dash. The way you put fuel in the 67 and earlier vehicles, you lift the trunk. There's a fuel tank there with a vertical metal fuel hose. It's not a hose. It's a metal. Like a riser. It's a metal tube, and you crank off this fairly large cap, and you just dump the fuel straight into the fuel tank. Now, in later model years, from '68 and later, on the passenger side, there was a little, actually, in from the interior, you'd pull this little handle, and it'd release a door, and then you'd take off the filler cap and put the fuel in that way, like you do in just about every car today. The '67 Beetle was also the last year that they had the low back seats. In '68 and later, they went to high back seats, again, Department of Transportation requirement for safety. And also, another like really conspicuous thing about the '67 Beetle, that's one of those last nostalgic aesthetics about it. It was the last year that they had a bumper that's different than this one. This is a later bumper from 1968 and later. It's kind of a bulkier bumper, but the old bumper on the '67 and earlier was what's called a blade style bumper by a lot of people. And it's really kind of an old timey looking bumper, and it has these metal overriders and then some some like vertical bumper guard pieces. So the '67 is like really like the last year you can get those things, as well as the door handles and the cranks for the windows are, again, you have these like these white ivory looking kind of plastic knobs, and there's just a lot of these little qualities about that are just more nostalgic. When they went to the later Beetles, you started getting more of the plastic knobs, the wing windows on the '67 Beetle, they had the metal latches. The '68 and later, they were also metal, but it was a different configuration, and they had this plastic rotating, I guess it's more of like a security mechanism, but it just, you know, it looked more modern. It didn't have that old-timey nostalgic qualities about it. So those are some of the traits about the '67. I also want to explain like what's different in this vehicle that might be '68, which parts are '68 and which are 1969. First thing is I can't say for certain, but there are things I know that are not '67. There might be some things that are '68 and or later. The most conspicuous is on the rear fenders, the tail lights are shaped where they're sort of kind of a rounded point at the top and then they're flat on the bottom. That was from 1968 and then up through a series of years after that before they went to these big grotesque round tail lights in the later '70s, mid-late '70s. But the '67 was the last year they had like this little smaller oval tail light. This graphic shows the two taillights side by side. So in the yellow box on the left is the 1967 and earlier taillight, and then on the right is the '68 and later taillight. And if you look on the far right, there's that grotesque round taillight of the '70s I mentioned. So I know the taillights are the newer taillights. Probably the fenders are newer, but they're essentially the same fenders between the 2 years. The front fenders, that was '67 was the first year they went to these vertical headlights like you see on red. So prior to that in '66 and earlier, they're more of a rounded sculpted headlight, which are kind of cool looking. So I would like that also on the '67, but that wasn't true to that model year. These next two photos give you a good idea of what the vertical headlight looks like on the '67 and later Beetles, as well as that more sculpted, sloped Porsche style headlight that you see on the '66 and earlier Beetles. And you'll also see the old style bumper as well as you look at these two photos. So I'm kind of a purist and I'm not likely to deviate, but some people do get the older fenders and the older headlights because the older fenders were shaped differently to accommodate that other style of headlight. '67 also was the last year of what's called the wide 5 bolt pattern for the wheels, and I know this FrankenBeetle, it has the 4 bolt, the newer 4 bolt pattern for the lug nuts. This graphic shows you the difference between the older wide 5 lug pattern on the '67 and earlier Beetles, and then the smaller 4 lug pattern from '68 and later. So what that speaks to, that kind of confirms what the seller speculated, as they said, I'm pretty sure the pan is a 1968 pan. Now the pan is really like the undercarriage, if you will. It's the floor of the vehicle, but it's also the piece of hardware to which you bolt on the transaxle, and the motor's bolted on the transaxle, and then the front axle is bolted onto that pan. And the pan is what you fit this whole visible body part on top of that. And then your seats kind of hook into some tracks in that pan, because that is your floor for the vehicle as well as the kind of the carriage for everything else. These next three photos give you a really good idea of what I was talking about regarding the VW pan for a VW Beetle. This first photo is top-down view of the pan showing all the suspension and wheel and transaxle hardware. So on the left you see the front axle and steering hardware. The center area is mostly the passenger compartment area. That's where it's flat and wide. And then in the rear area, if you follow the tunnel of the center of the pan to the back on the right side, you see the transaxle, the two axle halves, and the wheels there. What you don't see is there's no motor bolted to the rightmost portion of the transaxle. The next photo shows the body shell of a VW Beetle that's suspended several inches above the pan with the wheels and other hardware. And then the final photo shows a crew of 4 men. They're removing the body shell of a Beetle off of the pan, and then they're setting it off to the side, revealing what really sits under that body under normal conditions. So all the suspension and steering hardware and the passenger compartment area. And if you look closely at the very far right of the image, you will see a motor that is bolted to the back of the transaxle. So he was not certain about the history of the vehicle, but the pan sure smells like a 1968 pan because the bolt pattern on the axles, which are very intimately connected to that pan. So I think that pretty well describes some of the noteworthy differences. I'm going to explore more of that as I'm going to show you a series of photos that I actually took from the posting that the seller used for this car. And then I took a video I personally just made for myself to document the vehicle, because I need to make some decisions about what's the best course of action with this vehicle. So here's a little top tip for you. If there's any question about the history of the vehicle and its disposition with the Department of Motor Vehicles, do your research before you commit to the vehicle, because it's possible there might be some accumulation of back fees if somebody didn't do the necessary paperwork and registration work to make sure it's registered as being non-operational, which is in California we have this thing called non-op status, which means you're not going to operate the road on the vehicle on the public roads, and you're deliberately just going to park it, somewhere off the roads. And at a future date, if you ever want to put it back into service, then you go and you take it out of non-operational status, and then you register it as a vehicle you can drive on the motorways, the public motorways. So I want to make sure to do a little bit of research on this vehicle to make sure there aren't any surprises lurking with the Department of Motor Vehicles. But other than that, it looks like it might be an interesting project, and the key word here is interesting, as you will see as we get deeper into the video. So I hope you like this video. So I'm going to hand you off to the next part of this video. Happy viewing. These next 6 photos will give you much better detail about the FrankenBeetle. 5 of the photos came from the posting used to promote the vehicle for sale by the seller, and then the 6th photo is a photo I took. I'll explain that when I get to that one. So this first photo shows the vehicle pretty much as it sat when I came to look at it. It was clearly had been sitting for a very long time. It was settled into the dirt, and it hadn't been touched for years. I think this gentleman received the vehicle about 5 to 6 years prior to this point in time. When he first got his driver's license, he received it as a gift. It was a nice gift, but he didn't have the expertise or the money or the time to get it back to a operational state. It's a pretty picked over vehicle, but it's still a good Beetle to have if you like Beetles and you like to work on them and restore them. So let's get into some of the details here that are noteworthy. Just looking at this photo, it's evident that there are parts from different model years of VW Beetles. The fenders are a dead giveaway, partly by the color, but also the 1967 Beetle fenders down low below the front headlights and near the bumper hardware opening. There's that vertical opening below the headlights. Right to the left of that opening below the headlight would be a grill. Actually, it's a non-functional grill, but it implies there's something behind there like a horn, and it's supposed to let the sound come through. Well, there is actually a functional grille just like that on the driver's side, but it has a true hole through the fender, and the horn is positioned on the driver's side behind that hole. So those are some differences. Those are definitely later model fenders. Some other things that indicate it's a 68, if you look at the lug pattern on the wheels, these are the 4 lug wheels as opposed to the so-called wide 5 wheels. So we have 2 strong indications that at least certain parts of this vehicle are not 1967, but I can't say with certainty just looking at it as it sits from this angle that it has any earlier Beetle parts until we get to the next photo. Now in this next photo we see a shot looking inside the vehicle through the driver's door towards the dash, and that is absolutely positively a 67 or possibly earlier dashboard. There's no foam padding on it, that's one indication, but perhaps even more important than that is 67 was the last year Beetle where they had the fuel gauge separate from the speedometer. The speedometer is a perfectly round opening, and then to the right of that is a small square or rectangular opening between the speedometer and the radio opening, and that is the fuel gauge. So definitely a 67 dashboard. It's missing, this vehicle has been pretty picked over, so you're missing knobs on the dashboard, clearly the radio is missing. If you look on the doors, there's no door cards, there's window crank hardware missing. There's also no steering column. The steering wheel, as you'll see in the video, is present in the vehicle, but there's nothing to which you can mount that steering wheel because there's no steering column. So yet more evidence this thing's been picked over. You see some debris down on the floor. Let's go to the next photo and we're going to see what that debris is. That's basically parts for the engine. The engine, when we get to the photo of the back, you'll see there is no engine installed, but it is resting comfortably inside the passenger compartment. As you're looking at the photo there, you're basically seeing the motor from what we consider the front of the motor as it faces the vehicle towards the front. It's sitting sideways in the vehicle, but as we're looking at it, we're seeing the flywheel, which points or faces the front of the vehicle when it's installed. That mounts to the back of the transaxle. And then you'll see the thing that's sticking up, that kind of rusty thing that's sort of rectangular shaped, that's actually a radiator. It's called the oil cooler. It's a radiator that radiates the heat and dissipates the heat from the oil for the vehicle. So, and there's a fan shroud, a housing that covers that, and so it directs the flow of air off of the fan through that radiator apparatus through which oil is pumped constantly, and that helps cool the oil, which then therefore helps cool the motor. So VW Beetles are traditionally called air-cooled motors, but it is somewhat more accurate to say they're also oil-cooled because of what I've just described. Although the cylinders are purely air-cooled, but the cylinder heads, they do get some of that oil that has been cooled. So the heads get some benefit of air cooling as well as oil cooling. You also see the exhaust hardware and other things. You also get another better shot of the passenger side door. Much like the driver's side door, there are no door cards or no door panel. I think maybe the window crank mechanism that sits inside the door, that is present, but the glass is gone, and the exterior, the window crank that you use to physically roll the window up and down, that is missing. You also see the seat bottom for the back seat. I think also the seat back for the back seat is also in the vehicle. Not sure, but I think it is. Then the next photo shows the sunroof. Now there should be another piece there. There'd be actual sunroof that fills that opening that would crank forward and crank back. When it cranks back, it would recess into the back of the roof ceiling area of the vehicle, but it's gone. I don't know the story or the history of it. The sad thing is I actually had a metal sunroof, an extra one. Now my Blue Bug, that's a metal sunroof, and for some quirk of fate, I actually ended up with another metal sunroof. I totally forget how it happened. I think I probably bought it at a VW flea market or something. Not that I really needed it, but whatever, I bought it. And I then at some later point I sold it. Actually, it's quite a while ago, so it would be handy if I still had it, but hey, I'm going to be very busy getting parts for this thing. That's just another part to put on the list. And then this next photo takes us to a view of the back of the vehicle. We can see the engine compartment, and the motor is not present where it normally would be, but as you saw earlier, it is in the passenger compartment. Now here's more evidence that this has later model year Beetle exterior parts, because those taillights are absolutely later than 1967, because 68 and later they went to the taillights shaped like you see there up into the early 70s. Also, I can tell those fenders are later fenders because they don't have the holes to receive the supports for the older style bumper the 67 Beetle had. I will just mention that there's a lot of people that consider the 1967 Beetle the best Beetle because it had these quaint old-timey parts, as I mentioned earlier, and it was the first year they went to the 12-volt electrical system, which means you didn't struggle as much with trying to get the vehicle started or the headlights dimming when you stopped, and worrying about how much load you're putting on the generator. And it also, they went to a 1500cc motor, so they went to a bigger motor. So there's a lot of things to like about the 1967. It's got kind of like the best of the old-timey stuff and some of the best of the new stuff. This next and final photo before we get to the video is the VIN tag. I took this photo and it's inside the spare tire well inside the trunk. Earlier you saw a photo from my Blue Bug that gives you a better idea where it's located. But here's a close-up view, and when you look at the first three numbers, the 117 indicates, the first one indicates that it's a Type 1 or a Beetle as opposed to a VW bus, for example, and then which is called Type 2. And then the next position, which is another digit of 1, that indicates it's not a Super Beetle. So it's the original Beetle as opposed to a Super Beetle. And then the next digit indicates the last digit of the model year. So it's a 1967 Beetle. So that's how I know for sure this puppy is a 1967 Beetle. And I've obscured the other digits because those are just the unique serial number that's stamped on this particular 1967 Beetle. You don't really need to see that, and it's something I probably shouldn't show you anyway. All right, that takes us into the photos, and what you're going to see next is the video that I shot. Again, it was just an extemporaneous video. It wasn't scripted. I really wasn't trying to do it for you guys, but I realized after the fact, it might be kind of good for you to see. So I'll show you that, and then we'll wrap up our video. All right, and if you like the video so far, please click the like button. I also encourage you to hit subscribe and click the notification button so you get notified when I do other videos. All right, let's show you the video I took on site. Okay, we're looking at a you're looking at a FrankenBug, 1967, 1968 combination. No fuel tank, 2-inch drop kit on it in front, fuse box missing, wiring kind of incomplete, kind of compromised. A lot of hardware salvaged off it. It's got the 67 dash. Got a case, single port. No glass, except for the rear. Apparently a good transaxle. Later taillights, later pan, so probably 68 pan, 68 taillights, probably 68 fenders. And just take a look. Missing the sunroof top. No headliner. Apparently the quarter glass and back is available. Got the back seat hardware. And looks like it has the tins. Has the rear deck lid. So, and a steering wheel. See it over there? Hiding down here is the steering wheel. Alright. So, okay. And there's what the under part of the dash looks like. Looks like somebody made a cut for the dash tabs out. The only glass is you get the little wing windows. That's about it. No hardware here. Okay, FrankenBug. Check with the DMV and see if there's any fees on it. Signing off. Hey, Chasing Crusty Car fans, before I go, I'd like your help with something. I'm seeking your ideas for what you would like to have me feature on this channel. I got my own ideas, but if I just go off that, I will probably miss the target on occasion. So it'd be much better to hear from you what you'd like to have me cover on the show. And the way to do that, use the comments section. So you can put your ideas there. Plus, I love to get your comments on anything about the show. I do read all your comments and I respond to a lot of them, and your feedback helps me get the channel dialed in. So thanks for considering my request. I will see you on the next episode. Get your Chasing Crusty Cars apparel and accessories by visiting shop.spreadshirt.com using the link on the screen. Order today.